Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jimmy. And ladies and gentlemen, can we have a big round of applause once again for Mrs. Arundhati Bhattacharya. And ma'am, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. And while it's all about management, I can assure you that the questions I'm going to ask you are not going to be about finance. Because I think the financial world has a lot of questions. I have one question on the financial world.
Not on NPAs, I hope.
But largely management. In fact, I think you have preempted the first question because you said that you started way back in the 70s. And you were in a time when women really didn't join the professional world in India. So talking about gender, you know, today one's talking about gender equality, gender opportunities for equal pays all over the world. You did say it was a very male-dominated area, especially finance. So I think what we'd like to hear from you is, how did you manage to break this glass ceiling? And what were the, I think there are too many more men here today, I think far few women. So I think the men should hear, how is it and what is it that you did to break this glass ceiling to kind of reach where you were? What were the challenges? And we'd like you to be as honest as possible, because these are learnings that I want people to take back.
Sure. First of all, again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak a few things and discuss what I learned in my journey. See, when we joined State Bank of India, why did I join State Bank, first of all? In those days, as you remember, you know, the opportunities in the private sector were few and far between. And you couldn't get those jobs unless you knew people. And my father, having been in a steel plant, he had no connections whatsoever. So if you needed a career, the two common things were those that you got through the Pan-India examinations, that is either the IAS or the banking exams. And I found, to my great disappointment, that in order to appear for the IAS examination, you needed postgraduate level knowledge in any subject other than a language. And unfortunately, I was studying English. So there was no way I could appear for the IAS unless I did a lot of different kinds of studies. So instead, I had a goal of being employed by the age of 21 because my father was retiring. He was in a PSU that didn't have a pension. So I decided that I'd take the banking exams. And in those days, actually speaking, you know, the exams had 3 papers. One was general knowledge, for which we just had a magazine called Competition Master.
Yes.
I think a lot of you all will remember that magazine. The younger generation doesn't know about it. So we studied the Competition Master. The second was English, for which obviously I didn't need so much of preparation. And the third one was logic. And I think, you know, what really helped me was the fact that I was at that point of time doing tuitions, because again, I didn't want to be a burden on my father. And I was teaching 2 girls. Now, as luck would have it, these 2 girls, one in class 5 and one in class 7, were, like many other girls, totally dud in maths. So what I used to do is, I used to do half an hour of mental maths with them every day, 5 days a week. Now, as a result, probably of that kind of exercise, my logic paper went very, very well. And obviously, I got this examination. I aced this examination. And you know, the reason why a lot of women have come up in banking is because during that time, post the nationalization of the banking industry, banks were expanding very quickly. They needed a lot of people. And all of them were recruited through these All India examinations, where, you know, the marks of your this written exam got added to your marks of your interview. And whoever got the maximum marks, they were the ones who were chosen. So there was no gender bias there. And because there was no gender bias, we found more and more women entering the banks. Also, probably, our parents thought that banks were quite safe. In fact, my mother thought that the only job we were supposed to do was count notes. So that being the case, you know, they were quite comfortable with us being inside a room and counting notes. So they had no other idea of what exactly I was doing. And in fact, it's not only my parents. My husband also tells me that he married me because he believed that bankers came home at 2. So he expected that, you know, I'd be home before he would come home, and I'd manage the home front very nicely and get paid a nice salary. So both of those 2 considerations were very much there. But anyway, I did join the bank. one thing that I find, and I tell this to youngsters, and probably it's not required in this crowd of people who have already made their careers, but I keep telling them that it's very important to build a reputation quite early on in your career. Because even though I had scored the maximum in my group in Bengal, when it came to actually giving us postings, I did not get a posting in the credit wing, which was supposed to be the best in the bank. Everybody who wanted to go up needed to be in credit. I was not chosen for it. Now, I can't really blame them. It is possible they didn't choose me because I had a literature background. They might have thought, how on earth will she manage numbers? It's possible. So I give them the benefit of doubt that it was not because I was a woman, but because I had a literature background. But because of that, I realized that if I have to get there, I have to create a reputation whereby people will start asking for me when a posting comes up, rather than the other way around. And therefore, it's very important early on to create a reputation. If you have a good reputation, the advantage was I was in the same organization. So whenever something came up, my reputation would normally precede me. So to that extent, I started getting good postings. And that has definitely helped, in getting me where I did get. The other thing I think that I tell everybody, and which I practice very much myself, is to keep learning. I think I had to do an enormous amount of learning. Coming from literature into finance itself was a huge, big leap, and I had to learn a large number of things. But not only going from one stream to another, but even within the bank, I managed, I think, almost something like 12 different sorts of jobs. So I was in retail, I was in corporate, I was in treasury, I was in HR, I was in investment banking. I set up new companies. Something, very few bankers can tell you they have done. But I did set up the general insurance company for us. I set up the private equity fund. Again, nobody in the bank had done a private equity fund before that. So I got a lot of opportunities to do a variety of things. And I think all of the learnings that came my way, that really helped me in getting where I am. Besides that, of course, you also need to be a little less, what should I say, serious about your own self. I remember, that my mother used to always tell me, you must multitask. You must multitask. That's the best way for a woman to get anywhere. You must multitask. So I used to ask her, what is multitasking? And then, I was in this Kharagpur branch, and I'm a very short person. And in those days, we had these very thick ledgers. So as an accountant, the ledgers would come to me real fast, One after the other, ledgers would keep coming, and I would do whatever I needed to, and I would keep putting it aside, and I would keep calling for these messengers who were supposed to take it from my table, but who were never there. So I used to keep yelling for them. Now, every 6 months, these messengers or the duties would be rotated. So the branch manager asked me, which messenger do you need? Now, out of the 16 messengers that we had, 10 had names of gods. Like Narayan and Madhav and Hare Krishna and stuff like that, 10 of them. So I told him, give me anyone with the name of a god. So he was very surprised. He said, why? So I said, I'm multitasking. I don't have time in this branch to take even God's name. But the way I keep shouting for them, God will understand I'm taking his name as well. So, you have to sort of keep having some sense of remaining grounded, of a sense of humor, because even then, in spite of all the tensions that come on you, unless you can keep your cool in those situations, it's very difficult to get anywhere.
That was wonderful, ma'am. So coming back to the question, so did you feel, while you did talk about learning and moving from literature to finance and keeping your sense of humor, did you actually feel that there was a glass ceiling that you had to break? Was there that feeling? You talked about merit when you actually got in. As you progressed up, of course, your reputation did precede you. But at any point of time in your career, did you feel that does this exist at all, or did you at all feel it?
See, there is always a doubt in people's minds that a woman will prioritize her family over work. Okay? And that is the doubt that makes them not want to give you...
Perhaps even more at your time.
Yeah,
much
definitely.
less today, perhaps.
Today, too, it is there, and that's why what happens is the team leaders are often a little worried as to whether if they take a woman, whether she'll be available at the critical time. So, I keep telling my women colleagues that, you should not be felt to be absent when you are absent. But when you are present, people must feel your presence. Now, what do I mean by that? When you are not able to be in that position, somebody or the other must be able to step in and do your work seamlessly so that nobody feels your absence. If people feel your absence, then it's going to be very difficult for you to manage both sides. And this is not only for office, it's also for home, mind you. Even in the home front, say suddenly somebody falls sick and you are not able to be there, there has to be somebody who will fill up that gap for you. Okay? So you need teamwork both on the home front as well as the office front. Similarly, when you are present, people must feel that you are present, meaning that you must make a contribution that is a little different, that is a little more. So, you know, you must make people feel your presence, but not feel your absence. If you can do that, I think, you know, if you can do that, then I think going up becomes easier. Glass ceiling wise, I would say that SBI is mainly a meritocracy. There were certain assignments for which they did not consider me. One such was in Calcutta, you know, which is the department that looks after the consolidation of the balance sheet. They told me that, you know, sometimes you have to work overnight with the auditors because, you know, the balance sheets have to be completed. So, you know, we felt you may not be able to do it. However, they forgot about all of that when they posted me into Eastern UP, and where I had to travel in the middle of the night, you know, to get anywhere. So I don't really think it was something very material that I felt. And again, as I said, if you are able to do the right things and build the right reputation, then probably you can overcome this.
You know, you've taken the next question away, ma'am, because being a woman, as you said, that it's not just the work and this perception that the woman will also have to take care of the home. Therefore, the support of the family, I'm sure, has been greatly played in your life. How did you manage balancing this, and how important is the role of family for a woman to make her career in India today?
See, the fact of the matter is, as it is, you know, a woman starts with a little bit of a handicap. There is no doubt about it, because even today in India, a woman is the primary caregiver. Now, if the family on top of that is not supportive, then that's a much bigger handicap. And you don't want more handicaps than you can handle. So obviously, you know, the family being supportive is hugely important. My husband, for instance, was in IIT Kharagpur. He stepped out of IIT Kharagpur mainly because I couldn't be in Kharagpur forever. Now, that's a huge kind of support that he gave me. Not all families would be able to do that. Similarly, you know, I have been very fortunate in getting a caretaker who takes care of everything. She cooks the most heavenly Bengali food, so I don't have to bother about menu setting. I don't have to bother about the household at all. So I have a lot of support there. My daughter also, in spite of the many difficulties she's had, she's always been very clear about the fact that she wants me to work. Not only that, even, you know, when I was going abroad and I needed somebody, my aunt came along in order to take care of my daughter. So yes, I have had a lot of support, but it's not only family members. It's even been friends, the spouses of colleagues. For instance, in Eastern UP, when I was there, when I was in Gorakhpur, suddenly I get a call that my daughter is having a lot of breathing difficulty. So I just called the spouse of one of my colleagues. She took her to hospital, stayed over for the night, made sure she was comfortable. So, you know, I am really very, very beholden to a lot of people who have helped me along the way. The only thing that I can say is, you know, you can create this by being kind, by, you know, helping people when they need a helping hand. And sometimes being kind is nothing, just giving a smile and, you know, asking how they are. That is sufficient. Because the fact of the matter is that if you are not kind to others, you can't expect kindness in return. But if you're kind even once to others, you will get 1,000,000 times more back. So I think that's very important, you know, to create that support system.
And the balance that goes
yes,
with it.
Otherwise it's very difficult to manage both sides.
So you've been a role model to many young people today in India, and definitely to women in India. Who were your role models, ma'am, as you moved along in your life, and who shaped or guided you, or were there any specific role models?
Well, you know, to tell you the truth, the women in our house are very strong women. My mother and aunt, in fact, have been, you know, I now believe that, you know, they are the ones who influence my behavior. I started my life in a place called Bhilai. And when we went to Bhilai, I was a few months old. Bhilai was a barren piece of land with red gravel and nothing there. Even for eggs and potatoes, one had to go 80 kilometers away to Raipur to buy things. And I remember that, there was a very small health center there. That's all the support there was in respect of medicine. And we had a neighbor, they used to live just opposite our house, and they had a son my brother's age and a daughter who was just a year younger to me. And we were all playmates, we were just growing up then. So I must have been 4 or 5 years old, and we were playing. Now, this little girl, suddenly she started falling sick. She had temperature, she wouldn't come out to play. And my mother was a little bit older than the rest of the women there because this was not my father's first job. And they used to come running to her to consult, ki kya kare, what is to be done. And the health center had no clue what was going on with her. So ultimately they said, no, you take her to Calcutta. And at that point of time, the casting of the steel plant was going on, the blast furnaces was going on, and that means continuous casting for 72 hours and all. And they weren't being given leave. So ultimately they found, our neighbor, he got leave. But very sadly, the day before they were to leave, this girl got taken very ill. And she came running, the girl's mother came running to my house, and my mother went. And within an hour or two, the little one passed away in my mother's lap. So all of us were terribly shell-shocked, in that small place. We were so close to each other, absolutely shell-shocked. But I found about a month later that my mother wouldn't come to bed. Instead, till 2:33 in the night, the light would be on in the other room. So one of those nights, I remember I crept out of bed, I went to see what was keeping her. And I found her studying, with thick books. So I was very nervous. I asked her, what are you doing? So she said, no, don't worry, I'm studying homeopathy. And because I couldn't understand, she said, look, you've got to help yourself. In this situation, there is no help, there is no medical help, but I will learn homeopathy and I will make sure that everybody is okay. And she went ahead and she was an intermediate passed. She got her medical certification in homeopathy, and till she died at the age of 90, 3 months before, she was dispensing medicine. And we have always seen that these people, they've always helped themselves. My aunt, for instance, she didn't marry and she still lives with me. She's 89 years old. Even today, she reads books that are this thick. And she's taken up a peculiar hobby. And that is creating the paintings of houses with Word. With Microsoft Word. In fact, I wrote to Microsoft and they were so impressed. They wanted to come and give her a Microsoft 365 free, just as an award. So, these women that I have had in my life, they have always shown the way that, you have to help yourself. You are not a victim. If you try and help yourself, you will certainly be able to do something about it.
I think that calls for a round of applause. And if your mother has been your role model, I think nothing like it. It's the strength of a woman to a woman that makes a woman successful, no matter however much that men try and support. So coming back, when you look back in your life, ma'am, do you have any regrets, any things that you wish you had done differently, or?
Well, not really. Frankly speaking, to tell you the truth, I have enjoyed my stint at the bank. And I don't really believe that, you can get up there unless you're enjoying what you're doing. So passion is very much required, and I think I have been more than rewarded for whatever I have been able to do. Regrets-wise, not much, excepting that, I love going to places, traveling. I have not been able to do enough of it. My father was not a very great traveler. He was one, in fact, who never went anywhere other than Calcutta. So every 2 years we'd come to Calcutta and that's it. And all of the LFCs and all, we never went around. And in fact, I used to do all kinds of strange things. For instance, when I was in college, for the short vacations, my hostel mates used to come to my house. And for the long vacations, I would go to their house. So I remember I was, that time I must have been about 15 years old when I was in college. And I was going to a friend's place in Meerut. So her father was a brigadier and was posted at Meerut cantonment, so I was going to go to her. So they told me, not a problem, you get into the train, get down at Delhi station, bus le lo, Meerut pahunch jaoge, bus station, we will be there. I and my mother will be there. So fine. In those days, there was this AC Deluxe Express. So I got onto the AC Deluxe Express, got down at Delhi and पूछे Meerut का bus कहाँ? They said, यहाँ पे थोड़ी है. You have to go to the bus padao. So you go up, you'll find the road there, you'll find a bus there that will take you to the bus padao, and from there you go. So obviously somehow those days you didn't even have trolleys. So I lugged my kit bag and then went up the stairs, then caught the bus. As I was getting down at the bus padao, one little young boy, he came running, Didi, Didi, kahan jana hai? So I said, Meerut. Arey, Meerut ka bus chhoot raha hai, aiye, karke. He picked up my bag and ran. So I thought he was going to run off with the bag. I ran right after him. So there was one bus that was coming out. So he banged at the rear of the bus and stopped it and put me through the rear door. I went up and then there was some seats at the rear, so I sat down over there. So the conductor came, I asked for Meerut tickets, he gave me Meerut tickets. I sat at the window and I was sort of, drowsing away. And the bus kept stopping here, there. So after I think 3 or 4 stops, the bus came into another station and stopped. And I sort of woke up and then I looked out of the window and my friend and her mother was standing there. I didn't even know that was Meerut. So I somehow, quickly caught hold of my bag and went out. And the first thing I did before I talked to them, I went to the front of the bus to see where it was going. And I found it was a bus for Hardwar. So those were the kinds of, experiences and adventures that I used to do. So traveling is one thing that I love doing.
And you want to do it even more.
Yeah, so that's one thing. And the other thing, of course, I've said this also a number of times, I wanted to do a PhD.
Yes, so are you still pursuing that?
Yes, I'm trying to. And in fact, IIT Kharagpur almost allowed me, almost.
Almost?
Yes, when I was in Kharagpur, actually the director over there, Professor K.L. Chopra, he was very supportive. He gave me a guide, everything. But then the Senate in Kharagpur felt that I didn't have the proper credentials to do a PhD in a subject in which I didn't have my postgraduate degree in. So they wanted me to stay in Kharagpur 6 months, pursue some courses, pass some exams, and then they would, otherwise they thought, their standard could get lowered. So in any case, I couldn't allow their standard to get lowered, so I said, fine. But I couldn't stay in Kharagpur also for 6 weeks, 6 months, and, I'd have to take leave, and things like that were difficult in those days. So ultimately didn't get to do it, but maybe now, I don't know. I'm trying to
We wish you the best. Well, one last question, ma'am. Thank you for being so honest with all your other answers. But as a banker, and I'm sure many of us in the room can't avoid but not ask you this question. Too many banks in India are in the news for the wrong reasons. And therefore, my question to you is very simple. Are these systemic errors? Are they human errors? Why are these things happening largely in a lot of banks today in India?
I think one thing you must understand, do not mix up the last PNB matter with the NPA matter. They're totally different.
Right.
The PNB matter is an operational risk failure. So operational risk failure is a failure which is definitely a failure of the systems and of the people. So it's not a failure of the fellow who did it, because he obviously did it with full knowledge, but it's a failure of the people who are checking on others' activities that they did not realize that such a big gap existed.
So it's human and systemic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the last one. But in respect of the NPAs, you must realize one thing, and this is very often ignored. The fact of the matter is, from 2008, when this exuberance in lending happened, if you look at the amount of infrastructure that India has got, around the NPA today is around 10 to 12%. 10 to 12% of it has gone wrong. But 90% of it has come out correct. And that is why today, at least, you have airports where you don't hang your head in shame when you get down. You have power where the government is saying you have only 3% deficit. So to that extent, you have ports which are world-class ports. You have even steel plants which actually are world-class plants. Today, India has become the second largest producer of steel. So the fact of the matter is, had these debts not been created or money not been given, India would not have been able to leapfrog to the extent that it has. However, we have gone wrong with 10 to 12% of whatever we did. And the reasons for that are multifold. The bankers, yes, I think we accepted projections that were very aggressive. and we should not have accepted it. But in those days, the GDP was at 8.5. Projection was that it would get to double digits, and that's what people believed. But you know, if you look at the others as well, multiple mistakes have been made. So even for the people who took the loans, they took it with the understanding that somehow or the other they'd be able to raise the equity, either from the market or from internal generations. Again, internal generations were poor because the GDP itself came down to half. In respect of the government, I do not think that they allocated risks properly. Risk allocation from the government side also needed proper understanding. If you are going to bid out a road with only 20% of your land acquired and the approval still not in place, there are too many risks. Those risks, if you put totally on the person who's going to build it and on the banks, then it's really not fair. Many of these risks the government has to mitigate because they are the ones who will procure the land. They are the ones who will give the approvals. So, you know, the way the risks were allocated were not done correctly. The projects were not prepared as they should have been prepared. And similarly also for the regulators. The regulators allowed us to lend for 30-year infrastructure with 10-year money. Now, if the loans can be repaid in 10 years, why do you want to give a 30-year concession? You should at the most give a 14-year concession. Why are you giving 30 years? You are giving 30 years because you know it cannot be repaid before 30 years. But there was no structure in the country to give a 30-year or a 25-year loan. Okay, so there were several mistakes that happened in the entire ecosystem because of which these things have happened. And I think, you know, what is really required is a deep dive within each of the stakeholders to determine what did we not do right, and then to ensure that going forward we don't make those mistakes again. That is, I think, very important.
Thank you very much. Ma'am, just one last thought. Going forward, having led one of the largest banks in India and globally one of the most famous banks from India, what is your vision for India in the next 5 to 10 years?
See, one thing that we must remember is that India at this point of time has a very positive dependency ratio, meaning the youngsters are actually supporting far fewer older people. Okay? So that is basically the demographic dividend that we have. But we must remember that this demographic dividend will turn in exactly 20 to 22 years' time. So in 22 years' time, India's dependency ratio is going to change. And if as a country, we have to become a developed country, that's all the time we have. We don't have time beyond that. So if that is the truth of the matter, we all need to work towards ensuring that this time is well spent. And if you look at India today, or anywhere in the world, if you look at it today, the biggest problem is the rate of change, evolution is happening much, much faster. So each of the cycles, you know, which used to take 10 years, went down to 5 years, to 2 years, to 1 year, now it's even months. So, you know, if you look at one of these mobiles, the moment it comes up, it's become backdated. The next one is already on the way. So, you know, if you look at technology, if you look at processes, all of these things are changing so, so fast. The only people who can really make their mark in such a situation is again people who are able to change fast enough and who are able to adapt and innovate. So, you know, Professor Roy was talking about innovation, education and innovation. I think one of the biggest thing we need to do in the next 3 or 4 years is to change the way that we are educating our people. Because our education was okay for the assembly line kind of situation. That no longer exists. Those are jobs that will get taken over by robots, whether you like it or not. What will not get taken over are those things which need the human element. And for that, essentially, the education that we are giving to our people needs to be very, very different. So I think, you know, in the next 5 to 6 years, we have to get our education right. We have to get our innovation and our entrepreneurial spirits right. And we have to ensure that the ease of business comes in that enables all of these.
And on that very positive note, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together once again for Mrs. Arundhati Bhattacharya, our CMA's inductee into the Management Hall of Fame. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much, ma'am, and over to